Everybody from the UK, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. So this session is called Using SharePoint for Business Solutions. What we're going to do through the session is actually show you a solution that we've done in a school in the UK, which has saved them quite a bit of money and streamlined some processes. So just to start off with, a little bit about me. I'm the Information Systems Manager at West Hatch High School in the UK. I've worked in the education market for around about 17 years, or just over 17 years now. Been involved in all sorts of early adoption of Microsoft systems, right from SharePoint, Exchange, Link, everything basically that is a SharePoint, is a Microsoft product, is basically we've done it. And most of the time fairly early. I also do quite a bit of presenting at events both in the UK, Europe and online ones like this for SharePoint Saturday India. And for my sins, I'm a SharePoint MVP, only fairly recently. Oh, that's good. So what we're going to talk about is I'm going to give you some background as to the actual reason we came up with this solution for this school, a demo of what the end result is, so basically what it does. Then we're going to talk about InfoPath 2010 and SharePoint Designer 2010. It would have been nice to have talked about 2013, but unfortunately the public release came out a bit too late for me to actually alter the presentation completely. So, background. In a school, and probably in lots of businesses around the world, there is an awful lot of paper. So we basically decided to take a solution that the school wanted to get rid of and actually turn it into an online version. For instance, in the school that this solution is, they use 1.5 million sheets of paper a year. That's an awful lot of paper. There's not just the cost of the paper, there's the cost of printing, the cost of copying, letters going home. So for instance, there's every so often with 1,300 students in a school, you need to send home 1,300 letters. That's an awful lot of time, an awful lot of postage, and a little old lady sat in the corner putting 1,300 envelopes through the franking machine. The actual solution is the academic review day, which probably most of you don't understand what it is, but in a nutshell, it's when kids come in with their parents, sit down with a teacher and set targets for the year so that they will achieve a certain target within the next 6 months. And the cost for that, when it was a paper exercise, was basically $8,000 for the 2 days, which is an awful lot of money in education. And especially in the current climate, as education budgets in the UK get slashed left, right and centre, and we actually lose money on a daily basis. So, first thing I'm going to do is show you an actual demo of what the system actually does. So hopefully you can see what I've got here, remoted into one of our servers at the school. SharePoint Learning Gateway, which isn't branded or anything, and this is basically the academic review day online form that the staff open up and log into to actually do the academic review. So what I'll do, I'll go through step by step and just explain what it's actually doing. So we have academic review days twice a year, so basically this teacher will pick the year and which day it is, so we'll do 2012-13 day 1. As soon as they've chosen that, they get 2 choices. You can see the 2 little computer screens pop up. Basically the standard and IEP are different for the different levels of student. We're going to just select the standard one. Down we then get a different view where they basically put in the student details. So we are going to put in, let's put in a student and find student's surname and find it. So we'll hover over. Let's have a look in here first. Let's do Smith. Maybe. There had to be lots of Smiths in the UK. Let's see, Connor Smith. All that box is doing, I'll show you how that in a demo in a minute, is basically pulling out of Active Directory the list of students that are in there. Then going to select the year that that student is in, so we'll say they're in year 11. We'll then select what form they're in, or tutor group, and basically what this does is again show you this in InfoPath. But what happens is, because they've selected year 11, it shows them the year 11 tutor groups to select from. So it's limiting their choices depending on what they've already chosen. And as you can see, it's put their learning manager in, who's in charge of the whole year. We'll select 11GH, and at this point, what it's doing is it's going away, looking at the database, and what it's doing is going through the actual database, looking for that student in that year and pulling out any data that's already in there for them. So you can see further down that when it's finished, what should happen if the details have actually been put in, that there should be a parent email, and I picked one that isn't, which is always a good start. But basically what will happen is the parent emails will be filled in there automatically. And if we click on the Review Target tab, what will happen is, if this student has actually had a review already, those previous targets will fill into that box. Let's actually, because we've got plenty of time, let me have a look and find a student that's actually had their review, so you can actually see it through. Okay, Compton. Let's do Mr. Compton. So we'll just go back through this again quickly. Day 1, get to the students. He's in year 11. Not sure what tutor group he's in, but we'll do 11NA. Going away, again looking at the data, trying to pick out any data that's in there already for this student, which hopefully, because he's got a record in that list. Okay, so there we go, it's pulled through. There's an email address of the actual parent. Now if we go to the reviewed targets, you can see that targets that were set last academic review day. So he's got to pick those, he's got to reach those targets for this one. So basically we can then at this point, in the discussion they have with the parents, they can decide whether they met or didn't met, or whether they partially met those targets, or they're no longer applicable. And teachers always like a little bit of graphic, so basically depending on what they select, gives them a little graphic so that they can actually see without reading what's actually happened. So we've got nice ticks, crosses, and a little double-headed arrow if they've only partially met. They then go to the Set Targets tab, and basically in here, write targets in, which can be whatever, and then they will click Submit, which I'm not going to do because that would actually submit that into there. And what happens when they click Submit, it appears on the student's front end of the Learning Gateway, which is our SharePoint environment for students. So they can see their targets straight away. So that's the basics of sort of what it actually does. So you've got the different views so that the teacher isn't scrolling down all the way through. I'll show you how that's done in InfoPath. as we move on. InfoPath 2010, extremely simple to use, extremely easy to connect to SharePoint, and it gives you two choices. The one I showed you there is a browser-based form, but obviously if you're in a business environment and you want a little bit more functionality out of the form that when the people fill it in, you can use InfoPath Filler, which basically will load that up. You can send an email link out. So you've got InfoPath Filler, and basically that will allow you to send a link out to the actual form, and the people fill it in. Your users can fill it in on using the InfoPath Filler application. Gives you a bit more flexibility. For instance, one of the features like tooltips, which you can, when a user hovers over a entry within the form, a pop-up says in this in this text box, fill in your email address. That only works in the InfoPath Filler application. It doesn't work in the browser-based forms. So it just gives you that little bit extra functionality. So there's just some quick graphics here from InfoPath 2010. Shows you how you can create a list, which we'll go through creating a list very quickly in a demo in a minute. But basically you set your server and your site locations. You can either create a list using InfoPath 2010, or you can create a form library. My preference whenever I do this is different people will do it different ways, but basically I allow InfoPath to create the SharePoint list or form library. Some other people create the list and the library in advance and then connect InfoPath to it, but I just like to let InfoPath do all the work for me. And then you could create basic fields, so you could create nice little text input fields. You can have different layouts, different page designs. You can put tables in there, text boxes. This bit here at the bottom, you can see you've got text box, combo boxes, rich text, buttons, and the person picker, which is a great one for pulling details out of people within your Active Directory. The current user one is a great application to field to put into InfoPath 2010. You simply add a text box, go into the control properties, and you select a function, and one of the built-in functions into InfoPath 2010 is actually current user, and it will pull out the login name of the user. So if, for instance, my login for Westhatch is arichards@westhatch.local, it will pop into that text box arichards, and then you can use that elsewhere in the form, so that you can actually search and use it as a filter within the form to actually show data to the user that's just specific to them. Excuse me, I keep taking a bit of a drink. I've got a lovely UK summer cold this morning, woken up. Okay, so we're going to do a demo now of InfoPath and just some of those options that you can put in. So let's just minimize that. So we've got InfoPath open. As you can see, this is the start screen. Top here you've got SharePoint list, SharePoint form library. You can do an InfoPath form that literally doesn't connect to SharePoint at all. So you could literally send an email from an InfoPath form and not save any data. You could use that, for instance, for something like a telephone message. So your secretary is in the office, get a telephone message, they type it all into InfoPath, and as soon as they click the submit button, it sends an email to the user with all that detail. Quick, simple, and email is obviously going to be picked up by everybody. You could also save that. You could do that as a SharePoint list as well, and actually save the data, so you can have an audit trail of telephone messages that are coming into the business. You then got other options of connecting to databases, web services, and you can convert from an existing form. So what we're going to do is actually just create a simple SharePoint list. So we've got the SharePoint list highlighted. Click on Design Form. And we need to select the location of the SharePoint site. So I'm going to type that in. It connects now. Here, down here we can see existing SharePoint lists in that site. So if you had already one that you wanted to use an InfoPath form with, you could quite easily connect it. We're just going to create a test one here. And there we go. There's our form. Quite simple. Just got a title and the attachments. So what we're actually going to do is get rid of that completely and have just what it looks like a blank text line, if you like. We're then going to put in a nice table into there. And put some headings in. Okay, so first off, let's put the one that picks out the current user, which we talked about. So what we're going to do is add the control down here. Click on text box, and as you can see, it's added it, called it field 1. We'll double click on this right hand side, and we'll call this one username. And in the default value here, what we're going to do is click on the function button and insert a function. And user 1 down here, and you've got username. Click OK. OK again. Now, one of the things you may or may not want to do is actually take notice of this option here, refresh the value when the formula is recalculated. What happens when InfoPath opens up within the browser or within InfoPath Filler is that it looks at the current user who is logged on and fills in that text box. That's fine if that form is only going to be opened once and by that user, because if not, if it's filled in by the user for the first bit and then say a manager has to fill in the second section of it, the problem with that is that as soon as the form reopened by the manager, it'll fill their username into that text box. So what we're saying is we don't want it to actually refresh the value. We only want it to fill that text box in on the first time the form is actually opened. So we click OK, and we'll just put a label in here. And over here we've got a nice preview button. So we'll click the and there we go. I'm logged in as me. You can actually see that it's filled my username in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just double click that text box and show you this over here, the control properties. Because another thing you may want to do, in fact, before I do that, show you the preview again. Okay, and what you can notice I can do is actually delete that and put in something of my own. So this is where I was saying double click it, go to control properties. If we go to display, we've got an option for read only. So we select that, click OK. If we go back to the preview now, basically I can't even in there. I can highlight it, but I can't actually do anything with it, so it's not editable by the user. Just to make sure, it may not be relevant in a business environment, but it's particularly relevant in a school environment full of teenagers. Okay, so we've picked out the username. What we're going to do now is pick out a picker. So we click on the drop down for all the inputs we've got. One of them here is a personal group picker, so we'll click that. I put it in the wrong place. Let's move it over here. Okay, you can see here it's added it as group over here, so we'll double click that. and we'll just say student typed properly. You can't set any default values or anything. You can decide to make it so it can't be blank, so the user has to fill it in. The form won't submit without it being filled in. Click OK. We're just going to double click it once more and go to the control properties. And SharePoint server is basically there. If you don't publish the form to a SharePoint server, you have to tell it where the SharePoint server is, because what it actually does, it doesn't directly pick the user out of Active Directory. There is no way of it connecting to Active Directory itself, and what it actually uses is the user profile service within SharePoint. So it looks at user profile service and picks out the users that have been imported into the SharePoint service. Excuse me. Picks the user out of there that are actually in Active Directory. The General tab basically allows you, if you want, do you want them to only pick people? Well, in this case, yes. Or do you want them to pick people and groups? You also have the option of basically getting them to only select either everybody in user profile service or just the people in a particular SharePoint group. So if you use SharePoint groups within your environment and you put, say, your teachers into one SharePoint group and your year 11 students into another, or you put marketing into a marketing SharePoint group, human resources into another SharePoint group, if the form is only going to be used by marketing, then you may want them to only be able to pick users from that marketing SharePoint group. So if we click on that, and basically then you've got the list of basically different options. So the Learning Gateway, which has got a nice typo in it, and our Olympics and etc., which obviously being in the UK we're getting all excited about. So you can choose which SharePoint group. We're just going to leave it as all users, and then click OK. So now if we go back to the home and we do a preview, so we've got my username. We'll do Compton again. Click on the button, and basically there we go. This is the bit about InfoPath Filler, that things look slightly different. So the preview actually opens up InfoPath Filler, so you can see there straight away that it looks different when it picks out the person, the group picker, than it did in the actual browser form. So it's picked out Compton J, John Michael, and we can put him in there. You can also do a search, so we can do a search if we want to. So let's do a search for Smith, because there's bound to be lots of those. And there you can see them all. You can see their email addresses, so you get more information from InfoPath Filler than you actually do from the browser form. Okay, so that's those two bits. Let's give that a label. So what I'm going to do now, we're going to do two more, which is year and form. Now, obviously, this one we're going to select the year, and then the next one, the next drop down, we want to actually be limited to what the user can see, once being as what they've selected on the actual year option. So the first off, what we're going to do is put in the year one. We're going to do a drop down list. Over here, we'll click it, we'll change that to year, and we'll edit the choices. So we're going to 7, 8, 9. That'll do now. We'll just pick from those. Okay. And in here again, we're going to put a drop down list. We're going to say that that is form. But obviously what we don't want to do is actually edit the choices, because there's two reasons. One, that will be an awful lot options to put in, and especially in a school environment, those form groups, so 7NA, 7BC or whatever, they change on a regular basis. So every year they change as teachers leave, etc., etc. So we want to pick out that data from somewhere else. So if I just minimize that and go back to here, what we've got down here is a SharePoint list with year details in it. So we've got a title of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13, which are the standard school years in a secondary school in the UK. You've then got a learning manager field, their account ID and their email address. Okay, so that list is there and we can change that whenever we want. If we go back again, we've also got another one here called list, and again that's got even more detail in. So we've got the year, all the year 7s, all the tutor groups that are in year 7, the same in year 8. All the details on tutor groups, learning managers, emails, etc., etc. So that all that data is in there, and the list can be changed at any time. But what we want to do is actually connect that to InfoPath. So what we're going to do is we'll go to data and data connections, and we're going to add a data connection. We're going to receive data from it. It's a SharePoint library or list. It's in the same SharePoint site. You can pull it in from a different site if you want to, that you actually have access to. And what we're going to pull in is the tutor group list, and we want the tutor group, the year, we'll pull all of that data in. You can obviously select which ones you want and which ones you don't. This is an option to be aware of in InfoPath when you pull in data in from somewhere else. By default that will be ticked, and what that means by default is that when InfoPath opens, it will pull all of the data from that list into memory, if you like, into the form. So that list isn't too big, the tutor group one. If you've got a very large list, you do not want to actually load all of that data when the form is opened. You want to be able to actually break it down as to what you're searching for, and then you can use a rule to actually bring in the data from your large list. But we'll leave that on at the moment because basically it's not a very large list. So we brought in the data. So what we're going to do now is connect it to this actual so we've got control properties, and this time we're going to basically get choices from an external data source. We choose the data connection we've just created, and the entry, we actually want it to be the tutor group. Now I'm just going to do this, show you. So we've selected that. So basically, let's go and have a look at the preview. Now what if we actually click that, we've basically got the whole list of tutor groups that are in there, and it won't matter. So if I select year 8, it will still bring back all of them, because all I've done is actually gone in and say excuse me, all I've done is gone in there and say bring back all of the data from that form, from that list, sorry. So we'll double click it again, go back to control properties, and this time we'll click on the entries tutor group, but this time we're going to filter the data, and we're going to add a filter. And what we're going to do here is scroll down to the bottom, select a field or group, and we're going to look at the main data source, because that's the main form we've just created, and we're going to select the year filter, click OK, and we're going to say we want that to equal field or group in the tutor group list 1, and select the year. So what we're doing on that filter is actually saying the options within that drop down list for the form only show the items where the year in the main form actually equals year in the tutor group list. I'll click OK all the way back, and basically if we go back to home, preview, should have nothing in there because nothing's selected. If we actually go and select year 8, I know why. Okay, let's do a quick publish. Sometimes when you do these, they don't actually, the filtering doesn't work when you're in preview mode. So let's just make sure it's actually working. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so because we've selected year 8, it's only showing us the options for the year 8 tutor groups. If we go and back and select year 7, it will only show us year 7, and so on and so on. So you can see that filtering is working. It gives you the option that users can't make mistakes. They can't sort of choose a year 7 and then go and select a year 11 tutor group or whatever else it is in your business. Okay. Okay, so that's how you basically select this forms. I'm just wary it's sort of half an hour in and I need to show you some stuff on SharePoint Designer. So I'll just show you, I talked about a rule basically where you pull data in from a different options from a different list at different times. You can select manage rules here, add a rule, so you could basically when this field changes, so when the form field changes, query for data, and you can query another data connection for data. So that will basically, what that will do is nothing will happen until that form is changed, and then basically it will change the pulling data from that list at that point. So that's the ideal option for when you actually want to use large lists of data but you don't want to pull it all into the form all at the same time. The other thing I was going to show you was the fact of when we showed you the actual Academic Review Day form within Learning Gateway, it was in different views, and all that is literally in InfoPath. Everything has a view, so this is the default view, and I can actually keep filling it in, keep going all the way down, have a multi-page scrolling form, which would actually do the job but wouldn't look very good. What we can do is create a new view. We will call it SPS India, and there's nothing in it. Okay, so what we'll do, put a bit of text in there just to show you. Let's go back to the main view. Let's put a button in here, so we can have a button. So what we're going to do is put the button in here, double click it, label, we'll put change view, and you can see there the action, it's on rules. You can have it so that it submits or updates the form or refreshes it, but we're going to use a rule because over here we're going to create a rule that says action. Condition is basically when the button is clicked. What we're going to do is we are going to switch views, and we're going to change it to the SPS India view and click OK. If we go back to home, do a preview. If I click that button now, it switches the view. Now in the actual form itself that we've created for academic, these are literally just different views. We've used a rule here which says if this field is blank, don't show the two buttons that are actually hiding in that grey box, and as soon as somebody has selected it, show them. And all that is a picture button. So basically in InfoPath, if we close that, in InfoPath, as well as the button, we can actually create a picture button. So in this option here we have picture. If we double click that, basically you have not got any pictures. Let's have a look in here, see if we've got any. Not got any pictures. So what you could do, basically you have in there a picture and a hover picture. So what you can do is you can have a picture and then a greyed out one as well, so which is your hover picture, or a coloured one. So if we actually go to this, I don't know whether this actually shows up as well through link, but if you look, those buttons across the top are actually grey, but when you actually hover over them, it's not actually showing, but they're actually coloured, so the picture changes colour as the user hovers over them. And literally all those pictures are picture buttons that then take you to a different view. It just gives the user a much nicer environment to work with. They've got a small form that fits on the screen, and all they're doing is going through. It's quite common. You can have a button that says next on it, or a little arrow that looks like a next arrow, and even though it is literally one form that's saved into one list, you can actually make it look a lot better. Okay, what I'm going to do is leave InfoPath there, because I am conscious of time and I can talk for as long as you like. So we're going to move on to SharePoint Designer. In this case, SharePoint Designer 20. Again, a lot of people may know SharePoint Designer and use SharePoint Designer from the actual designing of SharePoint sites. I'll readily admit, even though I'm a SharePoint MVP, I don't do branding of SharePoint. It's way too complicated for me. So my only interaction really with SharePoint Designer is to do workflows. You can view the current workflows on a site, and you can create new ones. On the SharePoint designing side, branding, I will add a caveat that with SharePoint 2013 and Designer 2013, it's a lot easier. So if you can get hold of that, or if you haven't already, and have a look at the new design features in the Design Manager within SharePoint 2013, that's really good. Creating a workflow, basically it uses conditions and resultant actions. So you say if a value equals a value, do this, and you can then get it to send emails, which you can pull details from Active Directory, which in actual fact is the user profile service within SharePoint, but it's the same. As long as all your Active Directory users are in SharePoint, you're fine. Pulls them through. You can send emails to people. You can use functions to create the subject of the email and lookups within the body of the actual email so that it pulls data out of the list. You can either have extremely simple workflows or very, very complicated workflows. If you're using very complex workflows, then I would recommend you use Visio, because within Microsoft Visio you can create a workflow in a more logical way using workflow symbols and etc. Import that into SharePoint Designer and actually use that to then add in all the details about who that email goes to, etc., etc. Okay, so let's have a quick demo of SharePoint Designer. So here we are, we've got SharePoint Designer open, and I hope you all can't hear my grandson running around like an idiot in the room next to me. So let's have a look. Workflows. So here we are, we've got the workflows that are assigned in this site. Let's have a look at one of these academic review day ones. So we'll open it up. Once it's open, we'll go to edit workflow, and as you can see, extremely simple workflow. So we're basically, once that form has been submitted, carry this workflow, and this is the workflow, and this is what we just basically added in standard text, and these are lookups. So if I just highlight that one, add or change the lookup, you can see that it picks from the current item, so the workflow is running on that list, so it will look at that list only for its data, and it will look at the fields within that list, so you can choose whatever the field is. And in this case, the student, we can, because it's a people picker option, we can pick out the AD attributes that we want to show. So do we want it to appear as a string, the user's display name, their email address, or their login name? And that will depend on your actual form and your email, and who it's going to. So we want display name because this email is actually going to the parent, so we want it to look nice. And then basically we've put down there the targets, so that the parent in this case, they don't take anything away from the actual interview. As soon as the interview is finished and submit, basically that email goes out to them with the targets. And as you can see from this as well, you can actually see the student email as well. So it goes to the Okay, so that's a very, very simple workflow. These options here again are pulled out as lookups. So you can see we're picking from the current item, the target, and because it's actual text, we're just putting it in as a string. Okay, so let's just close that one. Let's have a look at the workflow. In fact, actually what we'll do is close the site. Let's open a different. So this site, we're just going to open Okay, so we're going to open the staff site because that's got a few more workflows in it and some extra complex workflows. So if we go into here to workflow, what I'll do is I'll just show you what we're going to talk about. So this is our staff section of the gateway. And what we have, which is probably quite relevant to some business, is an absence request. So if I want some time off, whether it's to go and to the SharePoint conference in Las Vegas in November, which I imagine all of you are going to, which you really should, because there's going to be some really cool stuff showing off, we have to fill in an absence request. So if I click that, as you can see, it's opened up an InfoPath form. It's picked out, as you will know, my username, department and line manager have been filled in from data that's pulled in based on my username. And then basically it's asked for start time, end time, working days absence, etc., etc. And then when I'm going to be off. Now once I fill that form in, which I'm not going to, that's submitted to a SharePoint list within there. But what it then does, it actually has to run through a lot of workflows. So if we put it in people terms, I submit an absence request, it has to be approved by a person in the senior management team. Then if they approve it, it has to be approved by someone we call the cover manager, which is just basically to make sure there's not too many people out at one time within the school. And then the last person to approve it would be my actual line manager. So you see it's got 3 levels of approval, and at that point they can be declined as well. So absence request new. As soon as a new absence request is actually added, we have a very simple basic workflow which sends it to the senior team in charge of absences, an email with all the details in it, all the data, and then basically what they have down here is an option which is basically just a hyperlink. I will show you this hyperlink. It's basically built up from options within the actual SharePoint list. And what happens is when that user clicks on the edit form, they will see the form but with additional options to either approve or decline the absence request. So if they've approved or declined it, it then basically goes to the absence request changed workflow, which is slightly more complicated, because what that does then is as soon as an absence request is changed, it then looks at fields within there to actually make sure that are they approved, has it been approved or has it been declined at that level. So in here we have different steps. So you've got the SLT approval. So it looks and says, well, have they declined it? If they have, then email the member of staff and say, sorry, you're not allowed out, and then log it with the reason it's been declined. And then basically, if it hasn't been declined, has it been approved? And if it has and it's still active, then basically send it to the cover manager. And basically what happens is that goes on and on and on all the way down. As the item in question keeps being changed, it keeps actually looking at the form, looking at the workflow, and doing something on the workflow depending on which items are actually approved or declined. So as you can see, once the SLT is approved or declined it, then it goes to the actual cover manager, and then once it's done the cover manager, it goes to the line manager, and so on and so on. And then basically there's the last one at the bottom, which is any amendments. So has somebody gone into it and basically decided that they no longer want that time out, they no longer want the absence, so they've actually cancelled it. And then an email has to go to all the people to actually say that that workflow is actually, that request has been cancelled and that nobody needs to have time off anymore. So as you can see, that's basically quite complicated. And the way it builds up is you have the conditions. So you have all these conditions you could actually put in. So if values equal or it's created by a specific person. So if we just double click that, you see that basically what we'll do is we'll add, let's add a step, because I can actually cancel it if I need to. So we're going to add a condition in here. So we're going to say if any value equals a value. So we'll click the value, click the function button in the current item, and basically we then get to choose what we want to have, what field on the actual form we want. So we will pick anything. So if the line manager equals, and at this point we can either put text in or a function. So if we wanted to, we could just put if the line manager equals Mrs. Penny Johnson, who is actually my line manager. And then if we hover over again, you get a little orange line. Click there, and then we can choose an action. So we can, there's all sorts of actions. You can send emails, you can stop the workflow, check an item out, create a new list item if you want to. Within SharePoint Designer 2010, you can only create list items within the current list. You can't do it outside. So basically we'll just say stop the workflow, and then you can actually add a message in as well if you want to. Again, we can just put one in. I'm obviously not going to save this workflow because this is a running workflow, so it will mess a few things up. But you can see that's how easy it is to build up your strings within your workflow. You've got the option, obviously, as well. You can do an else if branch, so we can add. So basically it's saying if the current manager equals Mrs. P. Johnson, stop it, else send an email, and it goes to users. The two, as you can see, you've got the search, you can pick out all your users, so we can either add in a user manually like that, or you can actually do a workflow lookup for the user. So we could look at the current list, and if we actually scroll down, we've got an option in there for staff email. So then basically you're pulling all that data from the list itself. Click OK, and we'll just put in there, or we could again add in something from the actual list itself. So we could add the absence status, click OK, subject. Again, you can type in a subject, or you can build a function. So we'll add the subject will be, again, something pulled from the list. So you can see that's how you can build up parts of the workflow. They can get extremely complex. It's not, if you're going to get complex workflows, it's not the sort of thing you want to do when you're going to be disturbed every 5 minutes, because you will lose the flow. And that's also where, if you want to, you could actually export them to Visio or import it from Visio. Much easier to actually create a workflow within Visio, pull it into SharePoint, into SharePoint Designer, and then basically just add in the actual final details of who the emails go, etc., etc. The last thing to do when you're doing the workflow is wants to be actually invoked. So the workflow settings, you've got these two start options here. So start the workflow when an item is created, or start the workflow when an item is changed. That depends on when you want your workflow to run. And this one in this case, because it's only when an absence request is changed, then it's obviously done to start when the actual item is changed. Okay, that's workflows in SharePoint Designer. So that's sort of the end of my presentation. There's my details. I think these are being recorded and going up. I will also put this up on my blog so anybody can get to it as well, which is there, theedutechnow.com, and that's my Twitter address if anybody wants to ask me any questions at a later stage when they actually start messing about with SharePoint Designer workflows and get stuck. Also on the blog there's a lot of info on there about workflows I've done, and some demos and some examples of what we've done and how things can be done. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for listening. Hope it was helpful, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Hey, thanks, Erlen. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Everyone, we can open up any questions if you have. We have another 6 minutes to start the next session.